As we all know, an unstable economic situation usually leads to an unstable social and political situation. And this is what me and historian John Sneisen will be talking about in this specific video, going into a range of topics from Genghis Khan, Yugoslavia, Germany in the 1930s, and of course the Chinese Empire, in a video where we are going to be talking about the relation with crisis, with, of course, conflict. This is going to be a very important video, so make sure you share it with your friends and family members. And it's a video that wouldn't exist if it wasn't for your support on wearechange.org/donate. Wearechange.org /donate. There are many ways you could help and contribute, even ways without spending a single dime. And doing so allows these videos to be out there for you for free every single day. Now, just jumping into this particular topic, obviously we are in extreme situations as resources are strained, borders are closed, and some countries are becoming desperate. And with that, of course, we are going to have strained relations. And what the Pentagon is saying, specifically what the Joint Chief of Staff Chairman just said, is not reassuring, as he has just issued a statement warning our enemies, quote, not to attack 150 of the U.S. bases that are located all around the world, telling specifically in a message, quote, don't test us. Now, with this particular message going out, as well as the controversy that recently happened to a Navy captain that was relieved after warning about the sickness affecting U.S. military personnel, after the U.S. military also announced that they will not be reporting the people who are affected by this sickness, this raises a lot of concern and a lot of questions regarding to exactly how affected is the U.S. military by this sickness, and will that impact our geopolitical relations, show that we are weak, and potentially invite attack, which may or may not happen. And this is worth considering because this is something that is a big potential here. And as John is going to be telling you in a little bit, the historical correlations of conflict, the conflict that has happened historically is very common. The times that we're living in now, the time of peace, the time of no conflict, is extremely rare, especially when you look at the longer timeline of world history. Now, with the situation unfolding and countries becoming desperate, relations are also breaking down between our known allies like Mexico. And in Mexico, United States-owned companies and plants are being shut down by Mexican authorities because they are refusing to share some of those resources, including ventilators that Mexico wants, but now they are stopping the production of, since the United States does not want to give them this medical supply that is in short supply. Another medical supply that is in short supply, but many people want, is of course face masks, as we're also getting the news that the United States recently hijacked a major shipment of face masks in China that was supposed to be destined for France. With international relations, of course, breaking down even between our allies, you could definitely expect international relations with the people that the United States is geopolitically positioned against, like China, to be worse off. And of course, as we're getting more information about what China has actually done, the actions that they are committing, not only specifically hoarding a lot of medical supplies, but also sending contaminated medical supplies all over the world, with them also blaming this sickness on foreigners. There are incredible videos coming out of China right now, specifically highlighting and showing police and authorities going after any person that is not Chinese in China, specifically in a major PR effort to try to blame this sickness on foreigners. And the stories that I'm hearing from foreigners in China is absolutely egregious. And of course, the tensions between China and the United States, they are worsening off with many other drills happening. But John, we were just talking about the Chinese empire and their history of economic calamities and also conflicts. What context can you give us to the current situation that we're dealing with right now?
Well, what you see always throughout history, when you get in calamity, especially with your currency getting devalued severely, or actually using your currency as a mean to expand your, your control over the world. For example, any big empire throughout history had a printing basis, or the back to the Roman Empire, they debased the currency, they devalued it so they could spend more and more onto their military and then expand their vast empire. Just as the United States have done, by the way, where they have used the printing of fiat dollars to be able to expand into 150 countries and being a way bigger, probably the biggest empire the world has ever seen around the world. So. But what always happens is that, yeah, you could do it on that way. And of course, that was how the Continental was used, but it failed. It was a failed U.S. currency during this the Civil War, of course, by George Washington. They actually tried to force people to use it, saying that they were, not patriots if they didn't use the currency that was constantly getting devalued and losing a lot of value. So people didn't want to use it, but then they got forced by the point of a gun on the side of the guys that fought the redcoats. So it was both totalitarian on both sides. But not a lot of people know that part of history. And then, of course, you had in Yugoslavia, you had the whole inflation there, like the hyperinflation there, then ending up in the War of 1912 that ended up being a massive war down in Yugoslavia, of course, and it breaking up into all kinds of different states. Then you had the Weimar Republic hyperinflation that got hijacked. People were dismayed. They've saved a lot of money in the Reichsmark, and then of course the Reichsmark lost all its value, and so people were crazy and desperate for any help that they could get. And of course the Socialist Party of Germany came in and then hijacked that desperacy of the population. And then of course we all know what happened after that when they ended up into the big war that happened around the world. We're not going to mention it because of course YouTube doesn't like that. And then of course you had the first inventor of paper money was actually China and the Sung Dynasty. Back in 1024 they created the first fiat currency in paper format, but then they used that and expanded that into a huge credit bubble that pricked. And then of course they were attacked by the Mongols because they were very weak because their currency was failing. And of course that's what you see now. Like I put a huge thing between that and looking at Venezuela right now, where the U.S. wants to come over and take all their oil because they're super weak, because they destroy their nation with the fiat currency, of course.
Well, the Venezuela aspect is very, very interesting and important to look at, because exactly almost last year to the date, Donald Trump was talking about potentially invading Venezuela. There was big talks in Washington, D.C. about a direct U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. And of course, neoconservatives were very happy about that. Just to clarify our position on this channel, we think all war should always be avoided at all costs, no matter what. I mean, we've been anti-war for a very long time. And again, it's important to understand the factors that are happening here, and not just to place blame, but to fully understand the bigger picture happening here. Because countries like Venezuela, I mean, they're not just small independent countries on their own. They're countries tied to, of course, Russia, Iran, and also China. China is buying a lot of oil from Venezuela. They pre-bought it to the tunes of billions of dollars. China is propping up Venezuela. The Venezuelan government still exists mainly because of the economic intervention by China. China also, I've been talking about for a very long time on this channel, is providing the perfect kind of Thucydides trap. And this is, of course, a historical mention to when a rising power is challenging an existing power. And that's the exact situation that's happening between China and the United States. And historically speaking, the Thucydides trap always leads to war. This is something that we should look out for. I don't mean to fearmonger, but again, historically speaking, war is a lot more common than peace. We have a lot of peace, but China right now is something to specifically look at because they kicked out a lot of foreign journalists, especially U.S. journalists were totally kicked out of their country. They're blaming everything on foreigners. They're holding many military drills with their Navy. with contested land in the South China Sea. They're obviously not telling us the truth about what happened with this sickness. They could have prevented 95% of the spread of this, according to some U.S. studies, if they would have acted 3 weeks ahead of time, but we know that they lied and covered up. And again, we still don't know if they're telling the truth, since if you even look at their official story, they're talking about this sickness being contained in all of China, and it only affecting one city. If we look at the spread of this sickness in other places, in other countries, it's not just one city that's being affected. And throughout that time, 5 million people left the city of Wuhan and traveled to other places in China. So this leaves a very important question to how they were able to supposedly contain something that many people think came from a weapons biolab facility that was located in, of course, Wuhan. The United States is, of course, aggressively acting and saber rattling back with them sending out their U.S. naval destroyer to, of course, be alongside the Chinese military navy during their drills that are happening right now. So we're seeing a lot of saber rattling. We're seeing a lot of confiscation of medical supplies. The United States is dependent on China for a lot of their medical supplies. Some of it is contaminated. There's a lot of disinformation. And now this latest comment by the Pentagon, by the Joint Chief of Staffs, should be definitely worrying, since it's not reassuring. And with tensions also rising with Iran, all options are on the table, but this is an unstable situation, to say the least. Historically, is there anything even comparable to it?
Well, no, of course, historically, there's probably not too many times other than the Second World War, really, that could, be anywhere near to actually recollect that. But when it comes to, like, throughout history, you have all of these different countries, failing. And of course, Iran, of all places, me and Josh covered this many years ago, when they went into hyperinflation. So they are also desperate because their currency failed, and they're willing to attack the same as they are weak and can be attacked by the United States and allies, of course.
It's I just want to add one more point here. Iran also recently went to the IMF and said, "Yeah, we'll take your predatory $5 billion loan. Give us some money. We need some money now." And the United States is most likely going to block that attempt from Iran, even borrowing more money from the IMF. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Yeah, well, and the IMF is run basically underneath the hood by the United States, that still has veto power, that has the highest amount of voting power over the BRICS nations, which are, trying to get more voting power because, like, of the nation size, the U.S. has so much more control than it is on a global basis. But of course, IMF and all these other stuff, like, take a look at what happened during the French Revolution, of course. That livre, it was all, like, based upon, this livre currency that got hyperinflated and lost its value over there too. And then, of course, you had Napoleon coming in and taking over at that time as well. So it's all about the weakness. And of course, China, on top of being a rising empire, well, they was a rising empire because they created debt, and then they basically spread that debt around the world. They basically followed the U.S. model of building its empire, and they are trying to do exactly the same thing by the Asia Investment Bank, the AIIB, and other entities to indebt people around the world and then making them their slaves by they went recently to Zambia and other countries where they took they had loans, but then they failed, and then they took over utilities and so on in those countries. So, but it's exactly what the U.S. and their predator partners have done with the IMF before. So there's no no doubt here that when anybody's weak, and of course, China is full of debt. They have more debt totally than the United States. They're over 300% debt to GDP. If you account for all the debt that is within the country, the United States is very close, though. But I think all over the world right now, the world is weak because all our central banks have extended so much debt into basically hitting peak debt. And at that point, I think the odds for calamity, and looking at history, is unfortunately quite big, because you will have terrible reactions from desperate governments around the world when they're running out of money and they can't afford to keep their totalitarian regimes or their government running anymore because they're running bankrupt, of course. And that's a huge warning sign around the world. Watch out for getting people in that are opportunists that we saw with the Weimar Republic, that will have an agenda to then attack and murder millions of people around the world in a potential world war, because we're seeing weakening power and power is trying to gain more power around the world, and with a monetary crisis that we're heading straight towards into potential Great Depression. It was a PhD in economics here in Winnipeg that I listened to a speech that he had, and he basically said that the Great Depression was horrible, but you know what fixed it? It was the World War II. So when we have all this deflation in the economy, they believe that war is a great thing because it creates so much more debt into the economy, and it creates economic activity when there's none, which we have now, right? So there's a lot of dangers there. These bozos that are running the financial systems, they believe that we need some a potential accelerator that could create all this money, and what better than a war would fix that, right, Luke?
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy people who actually believe that. And I remember last night scrolling through Instagram, and there was this kind of post, there was this meme, and it said, do you want to know the religion that has caused the most amount of human death and suffering in this world? And they're like, scroll down, and it's like statism, the belief in government. So yeah, war should be avoided at all costs. And I know a lot of people in the United States are beating the war drums, especially against China. There's a lot of things to hold China responsible for. But before we do that, I think we should not depend on them for all of our medical supplies. And I don't think we should be cheering for war and a conflict against an emerging new superpower. I think we should avoid war at all costs. Diplomacy needs to be enacted here. And just like you said, countries become desperate when they run out of money. Already, people and countries are becoming desperate because they're running out of medical supplies. So until that's fixed, until that's solved, until, we could actually have, good positive relations, even with our allies, we should expect and prepare for the worst. And sadly, I got to say, I have a feeling like within my gut, I don't know if other people feel this as well, but I do believe that, especially historically looking at things, even the Great Depression with the San Francisco fires and the earthquake that kind of happened, these events usually come, very close to each other when they comes to crises and calamities. I kind of do feel like there will be another major earthquake or potentially bigger conflict, and I think we should do everything in our power to try to prevent it. I think we should always also prepare as individuals. This is why I've been telling people, get some storable food, get a bag of rice and beans, grow your own garden. I hope I'm wrong, but in life, it's better always to be prepared rather than sorry, because life is extremely unpredictable. Anything could happen at any time. And if you look at history, it's a daunting lesson that should have you looking out for all the danger signs that are out there. And I believe we're in that period. I believe we're in that time. And I believe it's better to prepare. I think it's better to look out for all the possibilities. Let's hope we could avoid them. John, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find out more information about you? And do you agree with what I just said? And you get the last word here.
10,000%. I totally agree with you. War is the worst thing that any human could be. We all need to spread love and love each other as human beings. So it's just utterly crazy with this whole war thing. But yeah, you can find all my work and everything that I do at theeconomictruth.org. And of course, you can find my books there that I've written, one about economic history, which entails into this very closely because of what's happening with money and the relation to war and to military might and all this stuff. It's so important for people to understand that and then see through all of the things that are happening around the world right now.
You dirty hippie! You're right. They just canceled Burning Man too. What are the hippies going to do? Anyway, that's our show for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, as you know, this channel is under attack. So if you found any information valuable here, share it with your friends and family members. There's a lot of important lessons to learn, especially historically. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Stay tuned for more here on wearechange.org.